I'm Jim Brett, President and CEO of the New England Council. Welcome to this month's episode of Inside the Corner Office, where we catch up with the leaders of top New England business and organizations to learn more about their career paths and the incredible organizations they lead. This month, in honor of National Disabilities Employment Awareness Month, we have a special edition of the program where I am joined by the leaders of two of the region's premier disabilities advocacy organizations. Jim Cassetta is the president of Work Inc., a nationally recognized pioneer in developing employment and community-based services for individuals with disabilities. And Joanne Simons is the CEO of Northeast ARC, an organization dedicated to the empowering people of all abilities to reach their full potential. Jim, Joanne, and I had a great discussion about what drives each of them to be advocates for people with disabilities. We also talked about the important role that people with disabilities play in our region's workforce and how their organization support workers with disabilities as well as their employers. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the conversation. Jim and Joanne, thanks very much for joining me today. I can't think of a better way to kick off Disability Employment Awareness Month than by talking with the two of you. So let's get started. Jim and Joanne, again, thank you for taking time being with us here today. You both have such an impressive background, and let's just talk about that background. Can you talk about your career path, how you got where you are today, and perhaps more importantly, what sparked your passion, and I mean passion, to be an advocate for people with disabilities? Jim, let's start with you.
Well, and thank you for having us. It's unusual for Joanne, my dear friend Joanne, and I to speak to the community that you represent, because we're always preaching to the converted.
Right.
We always talk to our colleagues at the Mass Council, but it's great to talk to people who really aren't aware of what we actually do. Long story short, I was a certified history high school teacher when I graduated from Salem State University. But I was on the board of the North Suffolk Mental Health Association in Chelsea at the time. And that board taught me a lot of how individuals with disabilities were shunned by society and treated. And I visited Joanne's old stomping ground before it closed: Fernald, Rentham, Devon, Gabler, Belchertown. You know, before the 1960s, folks with disabilities were not even allowed to be integrated into society. And my experience at North Suffolk Mental Health caused me to rethink my professional path. And I eventually joined North Suffolk as a staff member. And you all know sort of the rest of the story. I was at the May Institute for 5 years. And believe it or not, I stopped my 23rd year at Work Inc. on November 5th. And I can't figure that out because I'm only 39 years old.
So you worked at Jeff Keelson back then.
Oh, yeah. Jeff Keelson, Assistant Commissioner, Jerry Morrissey, Commissioner.
Yeah, right.
Joanne and I go way back in those days. So
And Joanne, what about you?
So my career path was, like similar to what's happened to a lot of other people. It was sort of an accident. I graduated from college. I got a master's degree in social work, and my first child was born with Down syndrome and 4 heart defects. And the world that I envisioned for him didn't exist. But I knew enough about human services and the way the world worked, having been a policy major in social work school, that the only way that I was going to make Jonathan's life the one that I envisioned, one where he would be included and welcomed, was to make it a priority for everybody, because we rise together. It wasn't going to make any sense if I could create a meaningful life for Jonathan if nobody else had a meaningful life. So I began my career at what was then the North Shore ARC, actually with my first job after Jonathan was born was then the Department of Mental Health, which included the Intellectual Disabilities Division, and then clearly saw that the real exciting, innovative work was happening in the nonprofit sector. So I moved over to the North Shore ARC at the time and was a huge advocate, which is when I ran into Mr. Jim Brett when he was in the legislature chairing the commission to divide the Department of Mental Health into what would then become the Department of Mental Health and the Department of Mental Retardation, which was a real desire of mine to see that, because people with intellectual disabilities were not being served well in this huge conglomerate of mental health. They didn't understand that intellectual disability was not a mental health disorder. And so when the department was established, that's where I wanted to be. So I went back into state government to work for the new department of what we called then Department of Mental Retardation, and then made my way to Fernald as a deputy superintendent, which was really an unusual career path and not one that I had planned, but opened my eyes to realize that there were valuable people and valuable staff who worked in a place that I didn't value because I believed in the community system. And then I went out and became the executive director of EMARC, which is now Communitas, and then the CEO of Cardinal Cushing Centers, and then back home full circle here at the Northeast ARC. But the story you don't know about Jim Cassetta, which I will share with anybody who will ask, is that Jim and I actually met on a baseball diamond. And unbeknownst to me, when my son was playing Little League and the clinic, and everybody makes it in clinic, that the next year he was going to be entering the draft, and actually someone was going to have to pick him to be on his team. And I thought, this is not going to be a good experience. So we come to the first practice, and this young man jogs over to me and says, "I am so happy that Jonathan is going to be on my team." And I thought, on what planet does this man live that he really wanted a kid with Down syndrome on his team? That was Jim Cassetta. And Jim will tell you that team went 0-13, but there's not a kid that hasn't come up to Jim in the ensuing years to say that it was the best team they were ever on. Every kid played every game the same amount of innings. And so Jim is too modest to tell you that inclusion begins in small steps in small towns and cities everywhere.
It's a great story. It's a great story, and I've heard it from several people in Swampscott. Talk about that experience and you being the coach at that time. So
he took every kid who nobody wanted.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And to this day, those kids are now 40, 44, 45. Sure. They still come up to me in town, "Mr. Cassetta, that was the best experience I've ever had."
Yeah, isn't that nice? Our region is incredibly fortunate to have both Northeast ARC and working as important resources for people with disabilities. So for those who may not be familiar with these two great organizations, can you tell us more about your mission and your key areas of focus? And Joanne, maybe you can start.
Well, the Northeast ARC was founded by families over 70 years ago, and still is a family-driven organization, part of the local, state, and national ARCs. And as such, our mission really is very broad in that we support families and individuals. And our organization has branched out into many lines of businesses, from early intervention to sports, recreation, Special Olympics, our partners at Special Olympics, Best Buddies, to employment supports, to industries, to small businesses that we operate. We call them social enterprises, to group homes, to independent living, we have an embedded home care agency within the organization, personal care management, family support, adult family care. There's probably about 17 lines of businesses, and now increasingly important emphasis is on those with autism. As we all know, that we've seen a huge uptick in the number of people who are diagnosed, and we know that with early intervention comes early results. And so we have a specialty early intervention program, and then we have a preschool program, and a specialty which is called acquired behavior analysts. So unfortunately, we all have more business than we can do, because the workforce challenge is going to be with us, and so we're going to be relying more and more on technology, which is where we're hoping to continue to lead the region in innovation and solutions that people may not see, obviously.
And Jim?
Well, our mission is sort of embedded in our name. Work Inc. was founded by Dr. William Woke, a PhD psychologist, in 1965. And I met him several times. He only passed away about a year ago. And he was a firm believer in inclusion and the three-legged stool. One leg is still needs a lot of work. It's a roof over your head, good clinical interventions, medication management, counseling, therapy, etc. And the third leg is something it's ingrained in our name, and I work on it assiduously every day, as does Joanne. It's work. You know, in this country, and Andrea and I have done a lot of research on why work is so important. It's not only important to the individual who's working, but it's also important to all of us who are supporting the individual who's working. Because in this country, there are 25 million individuals with disabilities. And out of that number, 2/3 of them are between the ages of 18 and 60. And unfortunately, with the unemployment rate in Massachusetts below 3%, and the unemployment rate in the country may be below 5 or 4%, the unemployment rate amongst those individuals still is 70%. And we are all supporting them. And that's a public policy I know you're going to get into, Jim, that we really have to look at. Because a public policy that prevents people from working is not a good public policy. And we do a lot of the same services that Joanne does, albeit a lot less. We do the family support, the residential, the Solidaridad, the Latino family support. And one of our biggest slices of the pie is employment. For those of you who've been in Boston, in every large federal building, working staff managing those sites. Because there's a federal law that says if individuals with disabilities can provide goods or services to the federal government, and Jim, you'd appreciate this, the strongest word in legislation is must. Then they must hire them, not may.
Right.
My friends in the legislature use may as an exit. It's must. So long story short, we're both in the same line of business, and we're both working to nudge that unemployment rate a bit lower. That's all.
Well, the reason I asked both of you to join me on Inside the Corner Office this month is because October has been designated by the U.S. Department of Labor as National Disabilities Employment Awareness Month. So what are the main goals for this month?
I think the main goal is to make sure that we don't have a National Disability Employment Awareness Month because we've achieved our goals. And that is, we don't have to reach that, as Jim said, if two people are coming to you to be hired and they're both able to do the job and one person has a disability, not that we want to require everybody that they must hire every person with a disability, but too often it's really societal attitudes that are creating this horrible unemployment rate for people with disabilities, a fear of the unknown, thinking, oh my goodness, the accommodations I'm going to have to make for this individual. Well, Congress just decided today that they could allow somebody to wear shorts and a sweatshirt,
Right.
Then those are the kinds of accommodations in a workplace that sometimes all is necessary. For someone, for example, to wear headphones and be able to listen to music, which will allow them to be productive at their job. So it's really, we have a public awareness campaign that needs to get done. But as you started, and why we're so grateful to be here, is that we hope that the New England Council members will consider, when they're talking about DEIA, diversity must include people with disabilities. And we have been left out of the conversation, in spite of the fact that inclusion is our bread and butter.
Well said. Jim, you want to add anything?
Ditto.
Okay.
And again, thank you, because this is one of our goals. The October is the national month for employment of folks with disabilities. As I said in my opening statement, Joanne and I always we preach to the converted. We talk to our colleagues who are running agencies. We don't get a chance to reach out to the quote private sector.
Yeah.
And we know that our individuals that we support can provide a great amount of resources to the private sector. And I appreciate you taking the time this afternoon to talk to us.
Well, both your organizations share a goal of helping people with disabilities find employment opportunities, but you go about it in very different ways. Can you speak a little more about how each of your organizations works with people with disabilities, and then what type of employment opportunities you try to connect them with?
Well, Jim has got a totally different program and incredibly successful one. So the strategy that the Northeast ARC takes is really one which begins with an individual. We work both with the Department of Developmental Services. We also work closely with the Mass Rehab Commission, and we work closely with schools and colleges locally. And we try to meet the individual with what they want. What are they wanting to do within reason and what their abilities are. So it's job readiness training. It's teaching people. Sometimes it's teaching people how to show up on time. Sometimes it's how do you take a lunch break and how do you sign in for a job.
Oops.
Whoops for that. And we also have several social enterprises. So we have a coffee shop called Breaking Grounds, and I urge you all to come because it's not breaking even. But it's in downtown Peabody, and we've trained and placed 35 people in jobs in the community. So it's not a coffee shop like some coffee shops, which I actually am not don't favor as well, where all the employees are people with disabilities, and that's where they stay for their career. They're in that coffee shop. Our coffee shop comes in, trains people for 2 to 3 months, and then we place them in jobs. We have 11 people in 11 different Starbucks. We have people at Dunkin' Donuts. We have people at locally owned and operated stores. We're helping the economy because it's not only our organizations that are suffering because of the workforce challenge, but all the businesses need workers. So we're providing them with workers. Then we have a document destruction company where we're love to be able to take New England Council members. We'll take your paper if you still have any, or take any of your hard drives or whatever it is you want to destroy. We'll pick up and we'll undercut the competition, and we provide jobs for people with disabilities there. And in our retail store at the Liberty Tree Mall, which is Parcels, we have Project Parcels that is similar to Project Perk, which is at the coffee shop, training folks for jobs in retail, where they're going to work for our friends at companies like TJX and others. And we couldn't do this work without incredibly strong partners in the community, the grocery stores, the large chains, the small companies that are willing to hire people with disabilities. And in spite of the fact that there's not enough of them, the list of those industries and businesses in Massachusetts who do support us deserve our highest praise.
Mm-hmm. And Jim, we use the same approach. The initial assessment is important. I remember when I started, I was from the behavioral health world, and employment was an afterthought. And in my opinion, it still is at some point. But when I came to working, we were running a sheltered workshop, the largest in New England, where people came to Work Inc. every day, over 300 people working. And the Department of Justice had to sue 2 states, Oregon and Rhode Island. Right. And they said, all you states did was reinstitutionalize individuals in the community. And I didn't disagree with that, even though we designed a $15 million building here in Dorchester that housed the workshops. But my colleague Sharon Smith, who's the CEO, I'm the president, met with the Commonwealth, and they wrote the blueprint for success to avoid litigation, but also to do the right thing. Right. There's right and wrong. That was the right thing to do. They gave ample resources to us, to Joanne, to Morgan Memorial, all across the Commonwealth, to eliminate Chapter 14C, which is paying people less than the minimum wage, and to close the workshops. And we were fortunate because Dr. Wilk got involved with the federal government way back when, believe it or not, Jacob Javits wrote the Javits-O'Day Act, Jacob Javits from New York, and that was passed in the 1930s for people who were blind. The law was amended in 1971 with the help of our own Senator Kennedy to include anybody with a disability. And Working jumped on that train in 1971, and we have about 130 folks with disabilities working all over the Commonwealth in the largest federal buildings, and they used to be dependent on us to get their support, which would guarantee them a life of poverty. Now they get paid the same pay as any landscaper or custodian or electrician or plumber that any other similar position would get. Because you know why? They can do the job, not because they have a disability, because they can do the job. And even though we have a little different approach, but we all reach the same goal, getting people a meaningful life position, including work and socialization. And Joanne we both have the autism program, and Sharon was sharing with me last week that we have a dating app now for our individuals with autism, and they're getting together and they're meeting and they're going out, and like all of us did when we were all a lot younger. So it's slowly inching towards the better way, but we have a long way to go.
Tell us a little more about the population that you work with and the types of disabilities that we're talking about. And maybe also tell us how the population has changed over the years. You just mentioned autism. That all of a sudden is getting more attention, but talk more about the population itself and then how it's changed.
Well, the population itself are people with, intellectual disabilities, autism, and traumatic brain injury. And how it's changed mostly is in the definition of autism that has become quite broad to include people who do not have an intellectual disability. So we have programs that support, for example, we have a college navigation system. A person with autism has all the academic credentials to get into college and be successful, but may not have the social skills to be able to navigate that transition in life. So those programs are now available. When I first started in this field, and so did Jim, the class of people that we supported were people with Down syndrome, people with cerebral palsy, people with autism who had more challenges than what we now identify as autism. And traumatic brain injury wasn't even really a group of people who were being provided services. So the idea is that you had to have a disability that occurred before your 18th birthday, which really then now we realize that, folks in, automobile accidents or people who had part of the opioid crisis are folks that now we see as people with brain injuries and now providing them. We also, as the deinstitutionalization movement became incredibly successful, we're treating people who have very complex medical needs in the community. They don't need to be institutionalized. They can be on ventilators, they can have trachs, and they can need 24-hour nursing if that's what's required to have them live successfully in the community. And both Work Inc. and the Northeast ARC are also leaders in deaf services. So people who both have an intellectual disability, but for whom sign language is their primary method of communication. So there are all these subspecialty areas that we now have within the broad framework of what we call intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities. We don't have a strong, the strongest programs for folks with very, very challenging behaviors. There are other providers who are leaders in that area, or people, for example, who are naive offenders, people who have an intellectual disability and also have had a problem with law enforcement. So we in Massachusetts, people who don't live in Massachusetts, sometimes we don't take enough time to say how great we are, how lucky we are to live in this Commonwealth. What I've seen happen in the last 4 decades is nothing less than extraordinary. It's just that we're both impatient and competitive and we want more, but we know that our colleagues in other states and families in other states are in awe of what we've accomplished here in Massachusetts.
In your experience, what are those biggest barriers for people with intellectual disabilities when it comes to employment? And then how do you help them overcome those barriers?
It hasn't changed since I've been in the business. It's perception, it's stigma, it's the assumption that this person can't do the job. We have 35 career development specialists at Work Inc. One of the things I share with them is, in the old days, they were looking at the help wanted ads. And, the food, the flowers, the filth. And those aren't bad jobs. But there are jobs that are maybe better than bagging at a supermarket or landscaping, etc. But when they say to an employer, we have a candidate for the job. Don't elaborate why the candidate for the job has a disability. Elaborate on the candidate's abilities to do the job. And I'll tell you, once we place an individual in a job, I will get phone calls after 3 or 4 months saying, do you have any more like so-and-so? And I said, well, what's so-and-so like? He does a good job. I said, yeah, we have a lot of individuals that can do the good job, not because they're challenged, because we assess them and say, what are your likes? What are your dislikes? What do you want to do? And then we try to find a job that meets just like us, find a job that meets their aspirations, not our assumptions. And again, like I just said, perception and stigma is alive and well, and we don't really hire a person with a disability. We hire a person that can do the job, and they might have a challenge. We'll take care of the challenge.
Unfortunately, in the past, people with disabilities have often been pigeonholed into jobs in fields like, food services, janitorial services, gardening, what is sometimes referred to as food, filth, and flowers. But today, many people with disabilities are now looking for more career-oriented opportunities where there's potential for growth, just like for all of us. Tell us a little more about the employment goals of the people you serve and how you can help them achieve those goals.
I think one of the areas that we forget about is the building of social capital and identifying social capital for people with disabilities. That most of us have received opportunities in our employment because we know somebody else knows somebody, we're out there. And so we really need to understand how social capital can be put to use for people with disabilities. The challenge for people who might be listening is that the range of disability is quite great in terms of the folks that we support. Some people bagging groceries 6 hours a week is something that they have aspired to and acquired because they started being able to work for an hour a week. They weren't able to be on their feet for 6 hours at a period of time. All the way to folks who are in professional jobs. We had a young man that we were working with as an intern in our IT department and has autism. Well, after working with him for 6 months as an intern, and we did this because our family support division said, hey, this guy's interested in IT, would you take a look and hire him as an intern? He's an employee. He's a valued member of our organization. Now, you would meet him and wouldn't see him as a person with a disability. So the range of disability is so great, and it has to be really taken on as a very individualized basis. We have to walk the walk that we talk. Our receptionists are people with disabilities that we support, who have learned to be very good at their job. But we have other folks who may never have a competitive job, but through other training programs that we provide, they'll be able to successfully go out to dinner with their families and be able to sit and enjoy a family activity. That would be a goal for them. So we really want to understand that within the rubric of employment, we can teach so many soft skills that can lead to a better quality of life if it doesn't lead to that 40-hour-a-week benefit-free, government-free reliance.
I think Joanne hit it on the head. Walk the walk, talk the talk. Joanne has a lot more employees than Work Inc. does, but we have about 700 full and part-time employees in our companies, and 17% have disclosed to us after they were hired and after they were doing a good job that they have a disability.
Mm-hmm.
We have a contract manager right upstairs from where I'm sitting, who we know is on the spectrum. But funding autism services has only been in the last 7 years. But this gentleman was hired because he could do the job. And we know he's on the spectrum, which is fine. And again, hire the person because they can do the job, please don't hire the person if they have a disability and do a pity hire. We don't want that. We want
Well,
people to work.
I'll take a slightly different position because I sometimes, and I don't want to use the word pity hire, but sometimes I have experience where somebody hires someone because they felt that somebody had twisted their arm, and then they realized that that person actually did a great job, which led them to hire other people. So I'll take that. I'll take it wherever we can.
Any way we
because,
can get it, Joanne. That's right.
Is that that friend? Now I always say to families. I mean, if you ask me how I got my first job, it was because my father was on the board of the organization that ran the camp that hired me as a camp counselor. Now maybe I would have gotten hired anyway. It should be the same for people with disabilities. We can't let families off. The families of our young people have been very involved. These are young people who are graduating now they have more technology than the three of us combined probably can safely operate. So we're going to have to find new career paths for them, new opportunities for them. But I would think that we should start with the families. Who do you know? Where do you do your business? Who knows your son or daughter because they've been with you since they've been 4 years old and might, knows that their abilities. So I think we just have to involve the entire community in addressing this problem. The same way we're going to have to involve the entire community in, addressing the issue about, migrants who are coming here eager to work. We need to hire. The solution isn't by ourselves.
Well, that's sort of the next question. The New England Council, we deal with businesses every day and leaders every day, and they all say the same thing to me and to the staff. They're all struggling with workforce shortage issues, and I know that human service agencies are no exceptions, and we have some issues there about the pay, and that's a serious issue. But we're all struggling to find workers to continue to provide services and support, whether it's for people with disabilities or for others. Can you just speak to what experiences, what can be done to address these workforce issues? Joanne, you sort of touched on a little of it, and maybe, Congress should be involved in immigration reform and helping more people coming in particular to help people, who are now living independently. But talk about what your experience has been and what can we do to address the workforce needs?
Well, I like to say, unfortunately, that it's like the opposite of musical chairs. There are 10 chairs representing 10 jobs that are available, and there are 5 people. And no matter when the music stops, there's still only 5 people. We have a population issue. People have been warning for decades that the baby boomers and the declining birth rate was going to create a tsunami. And the tsunami's here, but we didn't do any planning for the last 30 years, knowing that it was coming. It's here now. I think that we can have more of a collective effort, but what happens is that it's really everybody for themselves right now. We're staying, our planes are being delayed because there aren't enough air traffic controllers. We're staying in line to pick up our prescriptions because the pharmacist, there aren't enough pharmacists. So I don't know that we're going to be successful if we don't work together, but we can't work together if we don't look at the housing crisis, because it's just too expensive to live here. And are there changes in the Department of Labor regulations, for example, that would allow us, some of us, Jim and I, probably have an extra bedroom that we could provide for a staff person living in a group home, but the requirements in order for them to qualify would mean they have to have their own bathroom, a separate entrance, and things that we can't do. So are there things within the Department of Labor codes that could help us address the housing for our population? Accessory dwelling units is another, accessory dwelling units are being able to be used in some cities and towns for people, for family members. But what about a workforce issue, which is different than the tech industries and the finance industries, which can pay employees? If they were able to recruit somebody from overseas, they're going to be able to provide a salary that might be able to afford to live in Massachusetts. I see the solution as technology. Part of the solution is technology. And unfortunately, the other part of the solution is relying on family members to do it longer, to do it harder, and to do it with less support. Because I don't see a quick solution. The immigration issue would be a tremendous help. And some of our staff who are here are already, from, a majority of both of our workforces are probably African men and women who are already living with multiple people in an environment. And I'm sure they have other family members who could come. But, the crisis that we're confronted with now are people who may not have family ties or anybody that they could live with if they were granted asylum and the ability to work.
Agreed. And, I think Joanne and I have a lot of staff, and with the exception of us three, our staff is majority minority. The majority of our staff represents 36 different countries at Work Inc. That's a lot of staff. And, you read what the crisis of the day is, with the state spending $42 million a month to put individuals and families into hotels. And why can't a special work visa be granted to these folks? Because we have jobs. I mean, you take Joanne's agency, my agency, the other agencies in human services, the businesses that you all are listening. A lot of business folks are listening to this conversation. I'm sure you all have jobs available for individuals who can do the job. So it's a multi-pronged problem.
But it's
and
also
housing is critical.
And the visa situation that is currently available is weighted towards those industries that have power and money to be able to grab those. And we have not been able to do that.
Right.
And I just wanted to say sort of an anecdotal story. The other day I was driving to work by Salem State University, where their South Campus is now housing migrants, and these folks' families are from Haiti. Moms and dads were at the school waiting for the school bus. I saw the kids the eagerness for them to get onto this bus, the happiness of the families to be able to put their child on the bus. And then I saw these men and women, and these are opportunities lost if we don't figure out how to support them. And in my imagination, I wondered, 20 years later, these little boys and girls, what kind of contributions, positive contributions, if they can make to our Commonwealth, if we can make sure that have safe places to live and food to eat.
Well, here's a softball question for both of you. For any employers that are listening today or very interested in employing people with disabilities, how can they work with your organizations? And what kind of resources are available to support them?
Well, what I say to folks, and I'll say it here, call me directly. 617-691-1502. And I will guarantee that if you describe a job that we think any of our individuals can be successful in, they'll get a call back from a career development specialist the same day. Another thing we did, Work Inc. learned a lot from our individuals with disabilities. We don't really talk much about that, but they have a lot to teach us, especially in the federal sites that we have all around the state. We learned a lot from them because even when I started 23 years ago, I wasn't as experienced in the workforce issues as I am now. But since they taught us a lot, Work Inc. went out and we purchased a for-profit facility management company because they taught me that they can manage millions of square feet. So we purchased our own company, and 100% of the profits of that company go to Work Inc. Work Inc.'s the sole stockholder, a very unusual organizational structure. So if anyone is listening, and if you have facility management needs, we can provide them regardless of the size or the location or the scope of your facility. We can do it with our individuals, or we can do it with the company that Work Inc. owns. That's a very unusual organizational structure that helps improve the lives of individuals with disabilities. Thank you.
Well, Jim shared his phone number, so I don't know if you see that or it has to go that way.
Oh, you said the other way, Joanne, the other way. There you go.
But anyway, I also wanted to add that if any New England Council members are listening and they have a family member, a neighbor, someone that they love that needs services, please reach out. You know, we're the northeast part of Massachusetts. Jim is Boston and South Shore. Our colleagues are all over, and there are other New England Council members who represent other parts of the state and other parts of the human service system. So I want them to understand that we're here to help them as well.
Great. Final question. How can policymakers at either the state or the federal level help support the work that you do day in and day out? And are there any legislative priorities that you're currently advocating for, either in the state capitol or in Washington?
It's a softball for Jim.
Yeah. Jim,
You know,
I know what Jim's going to say.
you know,
Go ahead, Jim.
we've helped introduce,
Must. You're going to use the word must?
we've introduced legislation
Right.
that our own reps who represent our part of the world, Beal and
Yes.
Hunt
Right.
and Collins,
Mhm.
and all we said was, we wrote the legislation. I helped write it, of course. And we said, there are billions of dollars that the state of Massachusetts contracts out for services, billions. And a lot of those services we know we can do because we do it for the feds. All we said in the legislation was, whoever wins a contract to provide services that we know folks with disabilities can perform in, they must hire a certain percentage of people with disabilities. We've watered down the percentage. From 4 years ago, it was 10%. Now it's down to 4%. No, I say that it's up to 4%. There's a hearing tomorrow at the State House regarding that particular piece of legislation. We'll be testifying on its behalf for the 5th year in a row. And let's hope it doesn't get referred to a committee where it dies. Because we also didn't say, if you hire a person with a disability into a meaningful, competitive, integrated job, they don't depend upon the life of poverty that they may or may not be in. And that saves all of us taxpayers a significant amount of money. Thanks, Joanne, for deferring to my legislative intent.
Well, well, two things that Congress is now, hoping to increase the threshold of people on Social Security could save, which would really be helpful for people with disabilities who currently can only have $2,500. It goes back decades. That's a ridiculous threshold. And second is the one that, Mr. Jim Brett and I have been watching frustratingly at the federal level, which was to ensure that people with intellectual disabilities would be determined from a healthcare perspective as an underserved minority group. For those New England Council members who don't know, people with intellectual disabilities, have the poorest health status of any group in the world. And think about that for a minute. Yet we pour millions, billions of dollars into the health status of other underserved minorities. We want people with disabilities to be identified in that same group, which would allow physicians, dentists, other healthcare providers who are interested in working with our unique population. They would get the same tuition benefits that people get if they work in an urban area or work on a Native American setting. And as a parent of somebody with an intellectual disability, and Jim knows as a sibling, there are very special and significant health issues that are only associated with people with intellectual disabilities, Down syndrome, autism, cerebral palsy. The list goes on and on. Prader-Willi syndrome, and to have been denied this federal designation is really remarkable in the most negative way.
Well, Jim and Joanne, I must say, they are two of my favorite disability advocates. I mean, they have tremendous passion, as you can see and hear today, for the issue of disabilities, and just trying to allow people an opportunity who have disabilities to be part of the community, to make a contribution, to be like all of us, to have a job, contribute, to pay taxes. And you are role models for me, and I know for others in the community, because what you bring to the table, and you bring it each and every day. So I marvel at that, and I thank you for joining me today. And more importantly, I thank you more importantly also, for your tireless work in supporting people with disabilities. So, and to all of you tuning in, I hope you enjoyed the conversation and that you learned something about how people with disabilities can be valued members of the workforce in our region. And just remember Jim Cassetta's remark earlier, just about 70% of people who have disabilities who want to work are unemployed. A disgrace in this world of 2023. So we do have some work to do. So with that, I hope you all will tune in next month when our guest will be Brooks Tingle, the new CEO of John Hancock.